Buffalo's Baseball Hall of Famer, the Jimmy Collins story, is written and recorded by Adam Duke. Chapter 1. The Legend of Jimmy Collins. National Baseball Hall of Famer James Jimmy Collins, known best for in the early 1900s revolutionizing the way third base is played, was a first-generation Irish-American, a savvy businessman, and was dedicated to the game even beyond his retirement in 1908, as he served as president of the Buffalo Municipal League for 22 years. He died of pneumonia at Millard Fillmore Hospital on March 6, 1943, at the age of 73. His battle with the illness lasted 12 days, followed by a 3-day Irish wake that, like his play on the field, would become a thing of legend. In his front-page obituary on that evening's edition of the Buffalo Evening News, Collins was referred to as the greatest star Buffalo has ever produced for the major leagues, the game's premier third baseman of all time, and the manager of the first world champion team. Collins led the Red Sox, then the Boston Americans, to victory over the Pittsburgh Pirates in the first-ever World Series in 1903 as player-manager. Collins was multifaceted, with arguably an even more successful career off the field. Throughout his life, Collins made several investments in his hometown of Buffalo, specifically in South Buffalo real estate. According to the Buffalo News, upon his Hall of Fame induction, Collins had been in good health until a fall on an icy sidewalk just before he fell ill with pneumonia. After his wake, Collins' funeral services were held at Murphy Funeral Home at 1700 Hurdle Avenue and Holy Spirit Church on Dakota Avenue, which is still open, though the Avenue moniker has been changed to Street in the past 8 years. The services were just around the corner from his final residence at 75 Wilbury Place. In the years and decades following his death, many chronicled about the celebration held at Collins' wake, including Richard Johnson, curator of the Sports Museum in Boston, who in the early 2010s wrote lyrics telling the tale of the celebration, which were ultimately picked up by Celtic punk rock band Dropkick Murphys, who recorded the song Jimmy Collins' Wake for their 2013 record, Signed and Sealed in Blood. Collins' legacy lives on through the song, as well as in the hearts of Buffalo and Boston baseball fans. Not only was he the first third baseman enshrined to the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, but is also a member of the Buffalo Baseball Hall of Fame, the Greater Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame, the St. Joseph's Collegiate Institute Sports Hall of Fame, and was an inaugural member of the Boston Red Sox Hall of Fame. In his 14-year Major League career from 1895 to 1908, Collins amassed 1,999 hits, including 65 home runs with a .294 batting average, 983 RBI, and scoring 1,055 runs. He is still second on the list on putouts by a third baseman, behind only Brooks Robinson of the Baltimore Orioles, who played 9 seasons and over 1,220 more games than Collins, notching 325 more putouts in that time. Collins was a prominent figure in the early success of the Players Protective Association, an early baseball union, as one of Boston's representatives in negotiations. Shortly thereafter, he left the Boston Beaneaters, later the Boston Braves, which have since moved to Milwaukee and again to Atlanta, for the Boston Americans in an effort to get a better contract. The move, along with similar moves from other future Hall of Famers like Cy Young, Napoleon Lajoie, and Jack Chesbrough, helped to legitimize the American League. In the January 16, 1943 edition of the Buffalo Evening News, just weeks before Collins' death, an interview with the third baseman was published by reporter Cy Kritzer in celebration of Collins' 73rd birthday. The interview was one of few Collins gave in recollection of his time in the major leagues. It was in this article that Kritzer noted Collins was recovering at his home on Wilbury Place from bruises due to the fall on a slippery sidewalk. He also mentioned the push by sports writers across the nation for Collins to be inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, which Collins said he had given up hope for in the 6 years prior. It is 32 years since he retired, but his fame is as enduring as the day he quit, Kritzer wrote. In the interview, Collins claimed to have been the highest paid ballplayer of the era, making $18,000 in the 1903 season, once again speaking to his talent and business dealings. Collins also praised Babe Ruth's lively offensive play, but it was Collins himself and those on the early Boston Americans teams who opened the door for Ruth and Red Sox legends down the line to succeed in the league by helping establish the team, the league, and the World Series in the first place, as well as fighting for higher pay for players. Johnson, who in 2000 co-authored Red Sox Century, 100 Years of Red Sox Baseball, in an interview, deemed Collins the prototype for the modern ballplayer.
He literally crossed the train tracks to go from the Boston Nationals to the Boston Americans, as they were then known, before they were known as the Red Sox. And he was player manager. So, he immediately gave the new franchise credibility and star power because he's a great player. Certainly considered one of the 4 or 5 greatest third basemen of all time. And, it didn't hurt that he was Irish American in Boston.
The way Collins revolutionized third base play was by playing in closer to field short hits, sometimes even on the grass, according to reports of the time. The Buffalo Evening News dubbed him King of the Hot Corner, who dared to play third base as he thought it should be played. The legend of Jimmy Collins was birthed from accounts of an 1895 game against the Baltimore Orioles, while Collins was on loan from Boston to the Louisville Colonels that season. During the game, Collins came in from the outfield to play third base after Louisville struggled with a string of Baltimore bunts. Collins allegedly fielded multiple bunts in a row and threw out each player in order, and in turn earned a new role as third baseman. The Buffalo Evening News later credited Collins' time watching the game from the outfield for him being able to devise a way to stop the Baltimore bunting attack. Collins' biographer and Society for American Baseball Research, or SABR, member Charlie Beavis, in his research, figured out that the legend was developed from compounding of information wrong in each recounting, ultimately forming a grander story. He said in the biography that the consecutive bunts aspect came from the Buffalo Evening Post sports editor and Pony League president Bob Stetler's 1943 campaign to elect Collins to the Hall of Fame. Collins, in his final interview, recalled the legend, saying Orioles manager Huey Jennings told him Baltimore wouldn't bunt anymore that game, but said he responded that he'd show him something. Johnson said Collins and Cy Young were the two stars from the championship-winning team who led the Americans to victory. In that final interview, Collins deemed the 1903 series as the hardest games I ever played. The year after the Americans' world title victory in 1903, the National League champion New York Giants, now the San Francisco Giants, refused to play what would have been the second World Series. Johnson said this was done out of fear that if the New York Highlanders, now the Yankees, won the American League pennant and defeated the Giants in the World Series, it would make the Giants appear as the inferior team in the Battle of New York. Despite these fears, the Highlanders never advanced, as the Americans won the pennant on the final day of the season. This did not change the Giants' decision.
They had already announced before the American League Championship had been decided that they weren't playing the upstarts from the new league. It's the only time in Major League history that, a defending champion has been denied the right to defend their title.
Regardless of the fact that the Americans were unable to compete for a second straight world title, fans of the team contributed to a fund to purchase a 26-inch tall loving cup to honor Collins at the Americans' final home game of the season. The cup was later mentioned in the Dropkick Murphys song. The leader of the champions will receive today the magnificent testimonial of the Boston fans, wrote the Boston Journal on October 8, 1904. The Journal reported that the cup was also 18 inches wide, including its handles, and was furnished by A. Stowell and Company of coined silver with a solid ebony base. It also includes a ladle. 2 days after the cup's presentation, the Boston Journal published a follow-up article about the trophy, which was to be displayed in the newspaper's Washington Street window for contributing fans to appreciate, including the Royal Rooters, Boston's fan base, which, in the words of Johnson, was much more akin to a European soccer crowd than any modern baseball audience. The cup was reportedly presented by Collins' friend and Royal Rooters member Charles Lavis in the bottom of the second inning when Collins stepped up to the plate. According to the Journal, the umpire signaled for the New York pitcher to wait while a presentation took place and the Americans gathered around Collins. Captain James smiled, happy in the thought that he was so secure in the hearts of fans, the article said. As the legend goes, the cup became part of Collins' wake. As attendees continued to reminisce and drink at the event, Collins was taken out of his coffin and placed in a chair with the cup placed in his lap.
It was very much a traditional Irish Catholic wake held in the parlor of Collins's home. And a number of players, a number of his former teammates had traveled to Buffalo to pay their respects. And after, several hours of storytelling and carousing, they took Jimmy Collins out of his coffin, put him in a chair in the parlor, posed him with the trophy in his hands, and I'm guessing probably were continued to tell stories and sing songs.
From this, another legend was born, although Johnson said the lyric about drinking from the cup was embellishment. The cup now belongs to Collins' grandson Jim, full name James Collins Walsh, who said he and his family would ideally like to get it back to the Red Sox. Johnson said he hopes the cup might make its way to the Sports Museum at some point.
I'm hoping that when they do, they might think of the Sports Museum where I'm curator in Boston, and we might, they might allow us to borrow it to display at some point. because, again, his role in Boston sports history and baseball history in general is very significant.
Chapter 2, Jimmy Collins' Wake, Inspiring a Dropkick Murphys Song. Baseball, more than any other sport, finds a home within Dropkick Murphys music. Frontman Ken Casey in the late aughts even took over ownership of McGreevy's Pub, formerly the outside-the-park headquarters of the Royal Rooters, the early Boston baseball fan club, known then as the Third Base Saloon. He remained owner of the pub until its closure in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Third Base Saloon was opened in 1894 by Michael Nuffstead McGreevy, complete with photos of Boston baseball stars on the walls and chandeliers made from old bats. It was an honor to be part of unearthing such an important part of Boston baseball history, Casey said at the time of the pub's closing. Dropkick Murphys multi-instrumentalist and supporting vocalist Tim Brennan, in a July interview, credited Casey's diehard Red Sox fandom for the band's partiality to the sport and the team.
Ken has always been obsessed with the Red Sox, always. And so that just plays into it a lot. And then I think that the Red Sox made a horrible mistake by opening the door to us and letting us come in and do whatever we want, whenever we wanted.
Knowing the band's notorious affinity for the Red Sox, in addition to the fact that Dropkick Murphys are a Celtic punk band, Sports Museum curator Richard Johnson reached out through rap artist and baseball historian Pete Nash, known in the music community as Pete Nice of Def Jam Golden Age trio Third Base, with the lyrics to the song Jimmy Collins' Wake. Nash had previously told Johnson the story of Collins' Wake, which Johnson took as inspiration.
Never having written the lyrics to a song before, I said, you know the folks at the Dropkicks, right? He said, yeah. I said, okay. I said, you know Ken Casey really well, and Ken's the leader of the band. He said, oh, sure. I said, well, I know he's a baseball fanatic. I'm going to write a song about this. Don't ask me why I'm even saying this, but I just know in my heart I am going to write the lyrics to a song.
Johnson said he went home that night and didn't think much of it.
Roughly a year and a half later, I bolted out of bed one morning at about 6 a.m., dashed to my computer and wrote the lyrics to the song, Jimmy Collins' Wake. And it sort of, I wouldn't say it came to me in a dream, but it came to me in a sleep-like state.
Johnson said the band kept the lyrics he wrote, etching his name in music history, not dissimilar to the way Collins' name was etched on the loving cup he was presented, which is mentioned in the song's chorus as follows. Let's raise a glass and lift it up, then sip from Jimmy Collins' cup, and hail the lads that won the crown, that brought victory to our grounds. Let's raise a glass and lift it up, then sip from Jimmy Collins' cup, and hail the lads that won the crown while turning baseball upside down. Brennan said he did not know the lore of Collins' Wake prior to the band being approached with the lyrics, noting that he grew up in a predominantly basketball and Notre Dame football family, but said because the band was making semi-frequent appearances at Red Sox games at the time, it made sense for them to take it on.
We would have just a few years prior still been doing things with the Red Sox, like playing the national anthem and things like that. It was just still very much in the sort of sphere of everything for us, the Red Sox. So when Ken was approached with these lyrics, I think because it was still something that we were currently doing a lot, it made sense to do that song. And then luckily for us, the lyrics were fairly well written, and so that made it easy too. But yeah, it was Ken was approached and in the midst of his Red Sox fever, said, absolutely, let's do it.
The song became the group's second homage to the Red Sox. Their first, the 2004 single Tessie, a cover of Will R. Anderson's song from the 1902 Broadway musical The Silver Slipper, to which Red Sox fans have been altering the words since the first World Series. The original rendition is referenced in Jimmy Collins' Wake, with the mention of Honus Wagner crying, an allusion to Wagner being upset with the Royal Rooters picking him as the target of their parody, not an implication that Wagner was distraught at the wake. Back from the early days of baseball and the Red Sox franchise, there's a whole cast of characters, Casey said in a live performance for Radio BDC in December 2012. This is a song that we wrote musically, and Dick from the New England Sports Museum, actually a mad history buff, he wrote the lyrics about a gentleman by the name of Jimmy Collins, who was kind of one of the first stars of the Red Sox organization. With the release of Tessie in 2004, the band guaranteed a Red Sox World Series win, despite the team not having won since 1918. Famously, the prediction did come true, with the Sox sweeping the St. Louis Cardinals in 4 games that season. We wrote a song about baseball one other time, and it went all right, and we would like to try that again, Casey added at the Radio BDC appearance. But we would like to preface that we are making no predictions on this song that it's going to bring any good luck elements to any sports teams. We're done with those predictions. We want to retire undefeated. Despite Casey not intimating that the song would bring the Red Sox luck, Boston won the World Series the ensuing season anyway. Chapter 3, Herd Mentality. Collins' time with the Buffalo Bisons and growing up in Western New York. Baseball Hall of Famer Jimmy Collins was born to Irish immigrants Anthony and Alice Collins in Niagara Falls on January 16, 1870. He and his family moved to Buffalo 2 years later. Collins attended St. Joseph's College in downtown Buffalo, which, after a 2-year closure from 1891 to 1893, reopened, relocated, and has since been renamed St. Joseph's Collegiate Institute. Collins graduated from St. Joe's in 1888. St. Joe's VP of Institutional Advancement, Dan Warner, said that there is still a great deal of admiration for Collins, both at the school and in the greater Buffalo area.
I'll often catch guys just pausing between classes, looking up at the names on the wall in admiration, thinking, hey, maybe someday that could be me. And so he was the first, and there were many who have followed and many who have yet to follow. But I think as with many things at St. Joe's, our successes today are built on the backs of giants like Jimmy Collins, and it's a privilege to call him one of our own.
According to his obituary, Collins obtained an A.B. degree from the school, though author and SABR member Charlie Beavis deduced in his 2012 biography of Collins, the only full-length Collins biography, that this is likely untrue, and was assumed only because St. Joe's conferred many of this type of degree in that time. Through his research, Beavis found that the school had only issued diplomas and certificates starting in 1886, reporting that Collins instead received a diploma in commercial studies. Warner confirmed that the school did stop offering A.B. degrees prior to the alleged date of Collins' graduation. Beavis, in addition to fellow SABR member and founder of the Herd Chronicles, Brian Frank, said area high schools of the time likely did not have official school teams, but rather social teams comprised of students who attended the school. Beavis, in his biography, cited an 1889 game between the Emerald Baseball Club of St. Joseph's College and the Le Couteloux Club of St. Mary's Institute as an example, with St. Joe's defeating St. Mary's 28-8 in the contest. Beavis said in a phone call that he took a lot of flack from other baseball historians, as well as book reviewers, who thought the biography was too focused on Collins' business history rather than being a straightforward baseball story.
Anybody can write about the story of a ball player's baseball life, especially today. Yeah, you go to Baseball Reference, you get all the statistics, you weave in a bunch of stuff about the team and the city and the other players, and voila, you have a 200-page book that might sell, but it's not really contributing anything to the literature of baseball.
He said that while statistics are essential to a baseball biography, it's equally important to note the player's cultural impact. He added that he doesn't think the Red Sox franchise would have been nearly as successful if not for Collins' business acumen, and that it is a facet of Collins that is vital to understanding who he was, not just a ball player, but a businessman as well. He notes in the first chapter of the biography that Collins' father was highly motivated to move to a part of the city outside the First Ward. That dream extended to the betterment of his son's life as well, as Anthony Collins hired a tutor for his son James and sent him to St. Joe's for a business education. Collins used that business education well, both in contract negotiations as well as his personal endeavors, as he became a successful real estate investor in South Buffalo later in life. At the age of 18, unrelated to his baseball or business careers, Collins made local news coverage after attempting to de-escalate a bar fight on Ohio Street, which ultimately resulted in the death of a Canadian man named William Beecham, despite Collins' efforts to stop it. The fight took place at a saloon where now stands Onondaga Park, between Tewksbury Lodge and Hartman's Distillery. According to September 1888 reports from the Buffalo Commercial and the Buffalo Evening News, Beecham fractured his skull after he was struck and stumbled to the ground while drunk. He was taken to the hospital by police where he succumbed to his injuries. Years later, Collins would also witness the death of his friend and teammate Chick Stahl, who drank carbolic acid and died by suicide in 1907 at the team's hotel in Indiana. At the time of Beecham's death, Collins worked as a laborer just prior to joining the Buffalo Bisons in 1893. After playing in local Buffalo leagues in his youth and early adulthood, but prior to his time in Boston, the Bisons gave Collins his first professional experience as he played for the Herd between 1893 and 1894 while the team was part of the minor leagues.
He played for a couple of semi-pro teams in Buffalo. One was the Socials. He played for them for a couple of years. They were called the Socials. And the other one was called the North Buffaloes. And he played for them for 3 seasons. And obviously starred for them. And that's how he got signed by the Bisons in 1893.
The original incarnation of the Bisons began as a minor league team in 1877, a club which was invited to become a major league team in 1879, which lasted until 1885, just prior to Collins' first game with the Bisons. In Collins' 1893 debut with the team, in a game against the Erie Blackbirds, he played third base and went 2 for 5 at the plate, according to Frank, who also noted that despite Collins' position in his Bisons debut, he mostly played shortstop that season. Frank said though the team finished with a 61-53 record and placed 4th in the Eastern League that year, Collins hit .286 with 10 stolen bases in 76 games. The following season, he played in the outfield much of the time, hitting a team-leading .352 average with a league-leading 198 hits, including 51 doubles and 9 home runs, in addition to 18 stolen bases in 125 games.
Just based on his time in Buffalo, with the Bisons, I think he's a Buffalo Baseball Hall of Famer. That's just my personal opinion. But certainly, the fact that he went on to become what he became with, generally regarded as the greatest third baseman of the late 1800s and early 1900s, really revolutionized that position, is kind of viewed as the first modern third baseman. The first, really, one word that comes out about him a lot when you read about him defensively is graceful, which I don't think they were using for a lot of third basemen at that time.
Right.
But for him, it was a pretty stationary position where you stayed by the bag, you guarded the line, you didn't move a lot, and he almost played it more like a shortstop.
The Bisons returned to the minor leagues in 1886 after team president Josiah Jewett sold the team's biggest stars to the Detroit Wolverines and folded the team at the end of the 1885 season. Initially considered to become one of the founding members of the American League in 1901, the Bisons were bumped from consideration in favor of the Boston Americans, of which Collins was a part at the time. The decision kept the Bisons a minor league franchise until the team moved to Winnipeg in 1970. After a few more moves, that iteration of the Bisons has become what is now known as the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre Rail Riders. Mayor James Griffin in 1979 purchased the Pittsburgh Pirates' AA affiliate Jersey City A's, moved them to Buffalo, and restored the Bisons as a minor league franchise once again. After the team was sold to Bob Rich Jr. of Rich Products in 1983, the Bisons were relocated to what is now Salem Field in downtown Buffalo, as well as moving up to AAA ball. Chapter 4. How Collins helped spur the rise of the Irish American in early 1900s Boston. At a time when politics and cultural differences drove people apart in Boston, including turmoil between poor Irish immigrants and the wealthy Boston Brahmins, the success of the Boston Americans Baseball Club brought people together. In 1906, just years after player-coach and Western New York native Jimmy Collins led the Americans to victory in the first World Series, another Irish American, John Honey Fitz Fitzgerald, grandfather of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, rose to prominence as the newly elected mayor of Boston.
Prominence of the Irish American in Boston, that were taking over the political power in the city. Later, by Honey Fitz, became mayor, the grandfather of John F. Kennedy, mayor of Boston. So was, besides him being the manager of the Americans, he was also a symbol of the rising Irish Americans in Boston.
Collins enthusiast Kevin Osinski said, Honey Fitz was the first American-born Irish Catholic mayor of Boston, following a time in the early 1900s when the city's government tended to reject Irish Catholics, per Fitzgerald's National Park Service bio. Irish American supporters of Fitzgerald were awarded with government positions and contract work, with Fitzgerald running on the idea that power should belong to the people, despite his own success in the standing political machine. During his time in office, he established Fenway Park, among other historic locations. Honey Fitz, a Royal Rooter himself, was one of Boston baseball's most prominent backers. Fitzgerald, in 1897, prior to the introduction of the Boston Americans in the American League, served as Toastmaster at the Rooters celebration dinner for the Bean Eaters' National League pennant victory over the Baltimore Orioles. The Orioles were also recognized at the dinner for their victory in the league's Temple Cup postseason tournament over Boston. The tournament ended up becoming the last Temple Cup due to general apathy toward the games from both players and fans. Fitzgerald was a Massachusetts congressman at the time of the dinner and was joined by then Boston Mayor Josiah Quincy III, other elected officials, players from both Boston and Baltimore teams, and around 250 supporters, including women, a Boston Globe article noted. The celebration was held at Boston's Faneuil Hall. The congressman got a rousing reception, which ended with 3 cheers, the article said. He made an address of welcome and congratulation which aroused the wildest enthusiasm, and which showed him to be possessed of much knowledge concerning the national game. Researcher and author Charlie Beavis noted in his biography of Collins that Collins tried to downplay his Irish roots at times in fear of causing controversy. Despite this, he looked out for his Irish-American compatriots back home, as his business acumen helped Irish-Americans in Buffalo who moved from the First Ward to South Buffalo, where Collins owned many properties purchased with the money from baseball contracts he negotiated. Beavis in the biography also mentions the success of Fitzgerald and Irish Americans in Boston at the time only increased further ire toward them. With Irish American John Fitzgerald in his second term as Boston's mayor, Collins probably thought he could overcome the Brahmin-Irish divide to leverage a business opportunity or two as Irish Americans gained more influence in Boston. However, it was exactly the fact that Fitzgerald had been able to win a second mayoral term that Boston's business and social elite now detested Irish Americans even more than Fitzgerald's first term. Beavis also cites in the book a charter modified to make it more difficult for Irish Americans to become mayor, and recalls how Collins was even denied an opportunity to coach baseball at the Irish American Boston College, which ultimately prompted his return to Buffalo. In Emerald Thread, The Irish in Buffalo, author Timothy Bowen leads his chapter on Buffalo Irish athletes with 3.5 pages on Collins, including a paragraph about his real estate dealings. Wages from professional baseball were paltry, so the forward-thinking Collins prepared for a future after baseball by building houses in South Buffalo off Seneca Street, capitalizing on Irish migration to that area, Bowen says in the section. Within a few years, the enterprising Collins used his earnings from baseball to acquire a substantial real estate portfolio in South Buffalo. Collins was unable to purchase the more prime locations of South Buffalo, as 3 other developers with more financial resources, William and Paul Fitzpatrick, as well as William James Fingy Connors, purchased all the good land, leaving Collins with more flood-prone territory. But Collins bet on the city of Buffalo building infrastructure to create flood control along Cazenovia Creek, which they did, protecting his properties on Seneca Street and Pomona Place. He had the foresight as South Buffalo real estate was about to explode, Bowen said in a phone call. He owned most of those properties for 2 decades, but before the Great Depression, there was a housing depression that Jimmy got caught up in. The structure of his loans is what got him caught up, and he had to move in with his daughter Kathleen. Beavis also said in the biography that Collins' investments in the area would provide a solid income, particularly with the relocation of Lackawanna Steel to the area from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Additionally, the Diocese of Buffalo established St. Teresa's Roman Catholic Church on Seneca Street, with many of those Irish Americans moving over from the First Ward. Chapter 5. The Thread That Pulled the Sox Together. The Legacy of Jimmy Collins. A 1917 Buffalo Evening News article deemed legendary Boston third baseman and manager Jimmy Collins as the first one to put Buffalo on the map as a city which rears great baseball players. Throughout his career, Collins used the money for which he negotiated his contract to invest in his business endeavors, including various baseball clubs, but primarily in South Buffalo real estate. Upon moving back home in the years following his retirement, Collins and his family relocated to one of his South Buffalo properties. He also owned a summer home at Crystal Beach. In addition to 674 games with the Boston Bean Eaters and 741 games with the Boston Americans between 1901 and 1907, plus 96 games while on loan to the Louisville Cardinals in 1895, Collins also played 214 games with the Philadelphia Athletics between 1907 and 1908 before his retirement. After years of being cheered on by Boston baseball's loyal fan base, the Royal Rooters, it was time for Collins to return to his roots. Jimmy certainly needs no introduction to Buffalo fans, another Buffalo Evening News article reads. He is known as the greatest baseball player Buffalo has ever produced. He was born in Buffalo, and was the son of the late police captain Anthony Collins. Jimmy now takes care of his real estate in Buffalo. Collins grew up as the middle child of 5, his siblings including Mary, Harry, Anthony Jr., and Margaret. According to census records, Collins married Sarah Murphy in late 1906 or early 1907. However, record keepers in Boston, the state of Massachusetts, Buffalo, and Philadelphia were unable to locate his marriage record upon request. Jim Walsh says he believes they were married in Cape Cod, but is not certain. Sarah Murphy's mother, Honora Murphy, speculated in a June 1907 edition of the Boston Daily Globe that the pair had been married 2 months prior in Buffalo. The 1910 census shows the pair is married for 4 years and living with daughter Kathleen, though her name is spelled with 2 E's in lieu of a Y on the 1910 document, unlike future census records, which have it spelled correctly, at the home of Collins' brother-in-law, Thomas Good Jr., on Calumet Street in Boston. In total, Collins had 3 children: Agnes, who was born in 1908 and died the following year, Kathleen, who was born in 1909, and Claire, who was born in 1912. In censuses leading up to 1920, Collins had some variation of ball player listed under occupation. In the 1920 census, back in Western New York, he was listed as a real estate owner. Collins at the time was living at 30 Edson Street in Buffalo, adjacent to Cazenovia Park and what is now Warren Spahn Way, named after one of Collins' successors in the Buffalo baseball pantheon. Following Collins' death, he was survived by his wife, Sarah Nee Murphy, his brother, Anthony Jr., his daughter, Kathleen, and her husband, Frank Walsh, and his daughter, Claire, and her husband, George McCall. Kathleen Walsh gave birth to Jim Walsh later that year. Jim Walsh laughed as he explained why he himself never played baseball at a high level like his grandfather, though he did play third base, in addition to shortstop and catcher in Little League.
When I was very, very little, I was playing in the midget leagues of Buffalo, New York. Everybody thought I was going to be the next Jimmy Collins. Unfortunately, at 13, I found out what girls were.
Though Walsh was more enamored with chasing girls than baseball, when Jimmy Collins took over as president of Buffalo's Youth Municipal League in March 1922, Buffalo Times reporter Robert Stedler asked rhetorically if anyone could name a more fitting selection for the position and highlighted how kids in the area idolized Collins. Jimmy Collins, the idol of every youngster of today who has heard or read of the one-time peerless third sacker, Stedler wrote upon the move. Jimmy Collins, to whom all of Buffalo has pointed with pride and who is today one of the most highly respected citizens of the South Side. Collins was elected to the position after then-President Albert Febvre got himself in some legal trouble. Febvre was arrested on fraud charges in February and later sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison.
When he returned home, he certainly, he became, a fixture.
Upon his death, each municipal league game observed a minute of silence in honor of the people's choice. Johnson noted the similarities between Boston and Buffalo, 2 cities with large Irish communities proud of their heritage. He said that the bookends of the Buffalo-Boston sports connection are currently Jimmy Collins and Rob Gronkowski, joking that if time travel existed, Gronk would have been at Jimmy Collins' wake, leading the group in celebration. In 2018, KO Bar and Grill owner Kevin Osinski hosted a 4-day event at the North Buffalo Bar to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Collins' wake. It was held as a fundraiser for amateur youth baseball at the Hurdle North Park League, which hosted an annual Jimmy Collins tournament until 2022. The bar, also near Collins' Wilbury residence, paid tribute to Collins with various promotions, including a special beer brewed by Community Beer Works, deemed the People's Choice in honor of Collins' nickname. Before the bar was named KO, Osinski and his brother Jeff had initially considered naming it Skippers in honor of Collins.
Jimmy Collins was a great citizen of the city of Buffalo, great baseball player, great union guy. And when he retired, came back and was heavily involved in the Buffalo Muni League, and which I played as a young man. And he just had a great impact on the city of Buffalo and Boston.
Osinski said he thought it was important that people unaware of Collins' impact on Buffalo learn about it, especially given his legacy in North Buffalo. Though the bar closed upon Osinski's retirement in 2024, his fondness for Collins and what he meant to Buffalo has not wavered.
He was almost the essence of Buffalo. He was involved, a hard-working guy, became famous in Boston, came back, had a huge impact on building housing in South Buffalo in the ward, later moved to North Buffalo.
Jim Walsh said his son Stephen traveled to Buffalo for the event. Osinski had the chance to speak with him and said their conversations were wonderful. According to his Buffalo Evening News obituary, Collins' pallbearers were fellow directors of the Muni Association Albert Hanavan, Frank Klipfel, Thomas Bowman, Leon Nowak, Leo Pakanowski, and Frank Denny. The ceremony was celebrated by Reverend James A. Horrigan, and Collins is buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Lackawanna. Richard Johnson said the wake was a farewell to Collins done in the most traditional way possible, describing it as like a scene from a movie. Although Johnson was not alluding to Honus Wagner being President Collins' wake in the lyrics of Jimmy Collins' wake, Wagner and Collins remained close following their baseball careers, with Wagner visiting Collins on several occasions per Collins' obituary. Wagner deemed him a tough guy on the field and a grand ball player. In addition to Wagner, Collins was also friends with heavyweight champion bare-knuckle boxer John L. Sullivan, who was nicknamed the Boston Strong Boy. Sullivan reportedly roused a crowd at a public dinner for Collins in 1897, telling the Boston third baseman that he'd go further for him than any man in Boston. The following year, he congratulated Collins on winning the home run title. Joseph Kelly, the mayor of Buffalo at the time of Collins' death, named him the greatest player Buffalo has ever given the game. Others, such as New York Yankees manager Joe McCarthy and Bison's president John Gem, clamored for Collins to be put in the Hall of Fame, saying he should have already been inducted. Collins was inducted into the Hall in 1945. In 2016, the Buffalo News named Collins the 7th greatest male athlete and 2nd greatest baseball player to come from Buffalo, behind Jimmy Slattery, boxing, Christian Laettner, basketball, Rob Gronkowski, football, Patrick Kane, hockey, Bob Lanier, basketball, and Braves pitcher Warren Spahn, who was ranked number 1 overall by the News and still holds the record for most major league wins by a left-hander. Spahn played with the Braves from 1942 to 52 in Boston and 1953 to 64 in Milwaukee, with a 3-year hiatus from 1943 to 45 to serve in World War II. He split the 1965 season, his final year of play, between the New York Mets and San Francisco Giants. Spahn was a graduate of South Park High School and played semi-professional baseball as a third baseman while Collins was heading up the Muni League. Slattery, a former professional boxer, had a brief overlap working at the Buffalo Parks Department with Collins in 1942 while Collins served as head of the Muni League. Part of why Collins may not be as well known in Buffalo as opposed to players like Spahn is because a symbol of his legacy, the Jimmy Collins Memorial Fountain, which was set to be built in Delaware Park and was approved by the Buffalo Common Council, was vetoed in July 1946 by Irish-American Mayor Bernard Dowd, who instead elected to allocate funds to World War II memorials. A memorial to Collins never made it back to the table in the years following. Bowen notes the general lack of celebration of Collins in the city of Buffalo in his book Emerald Thread and elaborated further in a phone call. "We haven't done anything to correct that veto," Bowen said in the call. "I cannot believe people are not more excited about him. I've got to think he's a top 10, if not top 5 athlete to come out of Buffalo." In separate conversations with Charlie Beavis and Richard Johnson, both historians came to the conclusion that without Collins' negotiation efforts and move to the Boston Americans from the Boston Beaneaters in 1901, the Red Sox franchise would not exist as it does today.
It was Collins who had that business person attitude and understood the dynamics of the spectator base in Boston, which you had to have a deeper understanding of what it was going to take to get the fans to move over from the National League team to support the new American League team.
Right.
Collins had that perspective and could figure out how to monetize it. He was way ahead of his time, I think, as a business person. He had a decent education. It wasn't like he had a 6th grade education, I think that's an important perspective.
Johnson argued that the war between the Boston teams was won before a single pitch was thrown, with the Americans building their stadium across the train tracks from the Beaneaters Stadium, empowering National League players like Collins and Young to swap teams.
When he returned home, he was not at loose ends the way many players would have been. He knew what he was doing. He was a landlord. He was a business guy. He certainly parlayed a degree of his fame as a ball player into his business exploits. And again, really was set a great example for future players, I think, in terms of how to conduct oneself afterwards. Baseball needed him more than he needed baseball.
He also noted that Forbes currently estimates the value of the Red Sox at over $4 billion and questioned whether the team would be as valuable and historically significant without Collins' involvement early on. Beavis and Johnson are unquestionably the leading authorities on Collins' life and have both sung his praises, though he has in other ways gone largely unsung, especially outside of Boston. Following Johnson's correspondence with the Dropkick Murphys, the band quite literally sang his praises, helping to further cement the legend of Jimmy Collins in baseball history. Originally published digitally in October 2025, copyright Nexstar Media Incorporated. Story edited by Jackie Walker, Jonah Bronstein, and Aidan Jolly. Newspaper sources obtained from newspapers.com and genealogybank.com, with a complete list of sources available on WIVB.com.